Hello there and welcome. This is Jennifer. I'm glad you're here today. So this is one of my longer videos, but I have loads of cards to share with you today and lots of tips and techniques. Now, the heart of today's video is stamp layering. I still get a lot of questions about stamp layering and the best ways to get good results with stamp sets that have a lot of detailed layering or have many layers or are smaller images for layering. Well, I'm going to share with you today my favorite way to do stamp layering, and that involves die cutting first and using a stamping tool. If you do not have a stamping tool, I will link to a video up here on the top right where I share tips for stamp layering without a tool. So be sure to check out that video if you want to. Now, stamp layering takes a little bit of time to do, but it's excellent for making lots of images at once, which you'll see today. And you don't have any coloring or anything to do once you're done. You can just quickly assemble your card. I also like that stamp layering sets give a kind of realistic look, especially the ones I'm using today. For today's stamp layering technique, I recommend doing all of your die cutting first. This will be a big time saver and help get better results, and I'll explain that later. But I'm starting by die cutting a bunch of coordinating dies from white cardstock, and they're from two different sets, which you'll see a little bit later. Now, by having all of this die cut, a lot of them, I can do a lot of stamping then, and then I have plenty of pieces to make many, many cards. But you could just stamp a handful or a couple if you want, totally up to you. But I keep all my die cuts in little trays to keep them organized. I do want to mention two things before we move on. First, if you have a stamp layering set that you're having trouble with but do not have the coordinating dies, stay tuned. I'll do another video in a couple weeks that will share tips for that. Also, you can use this stamping technique of die cutting first, then stamping with regular stamp sets too. It doesn't have to be with stamp layering. All right, now let's start with the Poppy Field stamp set from Sunny Studio. Notice there are 3 flowers here, leaves and stems, but the 3 flowers each have multiple layers to it. There is a stamping guide on their website that you can follow. It's very easy because they put little coding on the packaging so you can see which layers go together. But I chose this stamp set because they're smaller images, many layers, and the results once you're done are amazing. They're just absolutely beautiful. Remember, you can skip some of the layers and still get great results, but I'm going to do all of the layers today just to demonstrate. So I have all my white die cuts ready to go, and it's time to do our layered stamping. I also create a template using those coordinating dies, just one hole for each of the images. This will help with the technique. Now, I also have my Misty stamping tool. You could use any stamping tool. And I have a sticky mat. I'll link to the ones that I like below. I just cut it down to fit into the Misty. This kind of holds the die cuts as we stamp on them. If you don't have a sticky mat, you can also put some tape face up behind the openings of the die cuts and do that. You'll see that demonstrated later. All right, so now I have my sticky mat, and on top of that I'm putting my template. So each of those openings is a little sticky to help hold the die cuts in place. I'm starting by stamping the 3 flowers all at once, so I put those 3 die cuts in place. Now I'm taking the label sheet that my stamps were all stuck to. That's that clear sheet here with the black printing on it. I'm going to freeze this so you can see. I took all of the stamps off and set it aside, and I'm using this clear label sheet to help me get placement. This is a really great way to do stamp layering. Let's start with that bottom flower. I find the first layer, which is usually the most solid layer. And see how I'm lining the black label up with the white die cut. You can see the little white trim around the edge. Once I have it in place, I use my magnet to hold it. You could use tape if you want to. Now I take that clear stamp and line it up with the black image. It lines up very easy, and it's easier to look through the clear stamp and line it up with the black printing than it is to try to center it on that white die cut. Now I just close the door on my Misty, and now I know that solid image is lined up on that bottom die cut. So let's do the same thing with that middle flower. See how I'm taking that clear label sheet, lining that image up, use a magnet to hold in place. Now I take that clear stamp and line it up with that black label, close the door on my Misty stamping tool, and now that flower will be positioned nicely on that white die cut. And then I will do the same with that top flower. By stamping all 3 flowers at once, we're going to save a lot of time, and I can make more flowers. You could do 1 if you want, but I decided to make a bunch. Now here are some of the different color combinations I used today. You can get a screenshot if you want. I use mostly Altenew inks and Gina K Design inks. You can use absolutely any inks you want for stamp layering. I just usually reach for Altenew because they have colors that are light, medium, dark, and extra dark that work well together. By the way, that one there in the middle is Snapdragon from Altenew. So these are the colors I'm using for the flowers. Okay, so let's get started with that base layer that we've already put in place. And we'll start with our lightest ink. Now I usually do my stamp layering where I start with the most solid image and my lightest ink color. And I work my way to the more detailed, smaller images and my darker ink color. That's what you'll see me do today. After I stamp this base color, the lightest ink, I can go ahead and take out the die cuts and pop in new ones and stamp as many as I want. And I did some with this light peach color, some with a light pink, and some with a light yellow. So I can make multiple colors of flowers at once. All right, now it's time for the second layer. So this would be the second most solid image. But remember, there is a number key on there to help you figure it out. I'm lining up the black label sheet with that bottom flower there, and I line it up with the stamping I've already done. It's so easy to see around there. Make sure it's lined up. So much easier than trying to use the stamp to line up. I'll hold that in place, and this is another trick. You can slip a piece of white cardstock under there, making it even easier to line up your stamp with the black label. Now you close the door on your MISTI, and there you have that image lined up. Let's do that again with the other 2 flowers too. So I'll take the black labeling, line that up, hold it there, and then slip the white cardstock underneath, and then line up the stamp with the black printing. Now it only takes a few extra seconds to line up the black label sheet and then the stamp, but it makes a big difference in getting those layers lined up just right. You really could eyeball it and not use that black label sheet, but I know a lot of people get frustrated with layering things. And when you have small images like this with lots of layers, it really is helpful to do. And I'll demonstrate it again on our next set of stamps too. This is something that I often do off screen, but I edit out just to save some time. But this is a great way to really make the most of your layering stamp sets. So now I will stamp this using my next darkest ink, so the second lightest ink, and you can see our flower starting to build. And I'll do that stamping on all of our die cuts. All right, now we can do the third layer. Watch how easy it is to line that black label up with the stamping we've already done. Now, one thing I do suggest doing is getting your head in over your images so you can look right through them. I do edit that out of my footage so you don't have to look at my giant head, but it does help to look directly from above. So now you can see how you can line up that clear stamp with the black label, which is so much easier than trying to line it up with that light ink underneath. If you've never tried this way of doing stamp layering, I highly recommend it. I find this is enough help to get all of my layers lined up, but if you need additional help in figuring out how things layer, most companies, I think all companies, provide a stamp layering guide on their site that you can follow too. Okay, so now I'm using my medium color ink. So this is just slightly darker than the last one, and I'll stamp this. Don't be concerned if the contrast between what you use this time and the color you used before is too much. It will lighten and blend and it'll look beautiful in the end. Also, your inks don't have to match perfectly. If you can't find 4 colors that are all the same but just light, medium, dark, extra dark, don't worry. Throw in another one. It'll work just fine. Now I'm lining up the 4th layer of these flowers. While I do that, I wanted to mention another way you can do layering stamp sets without needing as many ink pads. What you can do is choose an ink color and use that for one layer. And then for the next layer that should be a little bit darker, just stamp that same ink 2 or 3 times. That'll build up the ink color and make that layer darker. You can also use white pigment ink to make an ink lighter. I've done a video quite a while ago on using less ink colors for your stamp layering, and if you want to check that out, I'll link it up here on the top right. All right, so you can see my flower is really starting to look realistic. I'm just adding all of the layers. And again, in some cases, I just double or triple stamp a color to make it darker than what I had before. All right, now the last layer for the red ink here, notice that it's pretty small. There's very little to it. It just adds some details that you can do in a dark ink. Remember, you can skip some of those. As you can see, my flowers look nice as is, so you can always skip some of those detail layers if you want to. But I find adding those detail layers doesn't take long because we're using this trick here. And if you do this in a really dark ink, it makes your images pop. It really just adds some depth to it. So I think it's worth taking the time to do it. Now in this video, I showed you the steps I did for my red flowers, but remember, all along the way, I was making flowers in orange and also in pink. So when I had my first layer images in there, I did light ink for all of them. Then I did the second layer on all of them. And in the end, we end up with a bunch of red, pink, and orange flowers. Now I'm not going to show all the steps here, but I did do the same process to stamp the details in the center of the two bottom flowers. I just used dark brown ink and black ink for those details. Okay, now that we have our flowers done, it's time to do the stems and leaves. And these stems offer a great example on why I think it's good to do your die cutting before your stamping. If you have a long image, such as these stems, if you go to stamp them, you might stamp them kind of a little off, maybe at a little more of an arch. And then when you go to die cut with the coordinating die, it won't line up. So it's best to die cut first. And the trick that I'm doing today will really help. So you can see how I'm popping in my die cuts into the template. Then I will once again use the black label sheet to line up my stem stamp with the die cut. I'll hold that in place, and then I can line up the stem stamp with the black label. That way I can be sure I don't have any arch to it and that it'll fit onto the die cut. And I'll do this with both of the stems, and then I can also do the detail on the leaves as I did before. Another reason to do your die cutting before your stamping is if you're doing mass producing, where you want a lot of stamped die cuts. It's better to just do a bunch of die cuts and then the stamping than it is to stamp each image and have to line up those dies each time you run it through your die cut machine. It's a big time saver if you're mass producing too. So now look at all of these flowers that we have. This is just some of them. And then we have our stems and leaves too. So now I can make a bunch of cards with this and check out how realistic they look thanks to all of those layers. And remember, you could do unique colors too. I did more traditional poppy colors, but you could have fun and do anything you want. Now before we create cards with these flowers, I wanted to do some more stamping, but this time with pencils, paintbrushes, and crayons. This stamp set is another fantastic one, and I did loads of stamping so I could make a bunch of cards at the end of this video. Now this time I'm doing a little variation of the technique I showed you. This is the Sunny Studios Color My World stamp set. This and the poppies I think will be on my favorites list for this year. This has many things in it, including the pencil, the crayon, the paintbrush, and the paint palette. Earlier in this video, I already die cut a bunch of white die cuts from these dies, and now I'm creating my template. This time, my template is just a square cardstock piece, and I have two the same size. I'll hold these two cardstocks together as I run this through my die cut machine, and that will give me two square pieces that have the openings in the same spot. This will allow me to speed up my stamping even more if you're going to do some mass producing. It's the same technique as before, just stepped up a little bit. This is the method I do when I'm doing a lot of stamping and die cutting. This time, instead of a sticky mat, I'm putting tape on the back so that when I flip over my template, this sticky will be face up and it'll hold my die cuts in place as I stamp. And I'll put tape on the back of both of the templates. All right, so I put one of the templates into the bottom left of my stamping tool, and I'm putting the 3 die cuts in. Just ignore the other die cut opening there on the top left. Now I'll follow the same process that we did earlier. I'm starting with the most solid image and lining that up with our white die cut. In this example, I'm doing the crayon on the bottom right. Then I can line up my clear stamp with the black label, and that'll make it easier than trying to do it without that black label. All right, now for the pencil, it's just this solid black line that will be the barrel of the pencil. There's some room at the top and the bottom for the eraser and the tip of the pencil. I'll line up that black area, then line up the stamp with the black area, and then close the MISTI. And then finally we'll do it for the handle of the paintbrush also. Now I can stamp these 3 images with our lightest color of ink. Now instead of removing the die cuts and going to the next one, I'm taking this template and moving it up to the top of our MISTI. Here I will line up the second layer. It's the same process that we did before. I'm just taking the second layer images and lining them up with the stamping I've already done, using the label sheet to help me get it lined up. So on the bottom of our MISTI stamping tool, we have the first layer images lined up. Up here on the top, we have the second layer lined up. This will be a time saver as I do a bunch of stamping. So with this layer up here on the top, I use a slightly darker ink. All right, so now I can use both of my templates to do a bunch of stamping. You could use one template if you want, but I thought it would be easier to have 2 so I can quickly do these. So here on the bottom again, stamp with the light ink. Once I'm done, I can shift it up and stamp with the slightly darker ink for the second layer. So if you have room in your stamping tool, you can do as many layers as you want. If you have that memory MISTI stamping tool, the really big one, you can set it up so all of your layers are in there. And you just go to the same spot every time with your template and stamp the different layers in the different colors. But I find it easiest just to do the 2 spots in a regular MISTI stamping tool. Okay, so after I've done the first and second layer of all of my crayons, I did a bunch of different colors. Now we can come in with the third and fourth layers. So here on the bottom, I've lined up the third layer, and then I can move up in my MISTI stamping tool for the fourth layer. Every time I use that black label sheet to help me get the layers lined up. It's amazing the difference that makes over trying to look through the clear stamp and line it up on your die cut and the stamping you've already done. So if you've ever had a stamp layering set where you got a little frustrated with the different layers, try this method. I promise that once you try it, it will make sense and be very helpful in all of your future stamp layering. So I continued to do the colorful layers on these pieces, and I also stamped the tip of the pencils and the paintbrushes. So now I have tons of colorful crayons, paintbrushes, and pencils. And the best part is they're already die cut. If I would have stamped all of these and then die cut, I would have had to go and line up the dies every time with those images. It's much faster to die cut first. Now I stamped a bunch because I really liked the results of these images and I wanted to make a bunch of cards. I need a lot of thank you cards. But you could do the same process that I did and only create a few images if you just want to make one card. But keep in mind, when you are out making a few, it's just a little bit more time to make a bunch. So might as well do so you can have lots of cards to send. So now for the rest of the video, I am going to make a bunch of cards using all of these pieces and the flowers we created earlier. But I have a lot of tips for you on how to get things lined up and how to easily create a bunch of cards with pre-die cut pieces. So I hope you learn a few things along the way. All right, let's start with this card where I have some pencils squashed in between a thanks die cut and its shadow die cut. To line those pencils up just right, I used my sticky mat. This is the same sticky mat that I used in my MISTI stamping tool earlier. I place all of the pencils onto the sticky mat, and once they're all lined up, I can take 2 pieces of tape and I'll press it down and then I can pull up all the pencils together. This is Spellbinder's tape, which I find is great for things like this. I prefer Easy C tape for die cutting, but this is great when you want to pick up a bunch of pieces at once. All right, so now I can glue these right onto our Thanks Shadow die cut. This is the Avery Elle Loads of Thanks die set. You've got the shadow die and the word itself. So on the back of all of these die cuts, I'm putting some adhesive. Today I'm using my Barely Art glue. And I found that if you get this little attachment, you can keep your glue closed and keep it from getting clogged. That little attachment's very handy, and I'll link to the glue and that below. I found this glue is great for adhering things together, has a nice precision point. I like this and my Gina K Connect, but I'm still out of that. Okay, so once that's glued in, I can remove the tape and now glue the thanks die cut on top. This is 2 layers of white die cut, and then the top layer is black glossy cardstock from Erin Lee Creative. And check that out, didn't take long to put together at all, and the sticky mat made sure that all my pencils were spaced and centered just right. I glued that entire piece onto a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch note card. This is made out of Lawn Fawn Fog cardstock, which is super light gray. And on the front of the note card, I use the Sunny Studio Lots of Dots embossing folder. Just adds a little bit of interest, but otherwise the focus is the sentiment and those pencils. Now I used the same design on a few other cards, and I thought I'd share those too. This again is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, but this time it's a top folding white note card. I again used the dot embossing folder, but this time I used some paintbrushes. And you can see the color on the tip of the paintbrush. I put glossy accents on that so it would have a little bit of shine and dimension. Now on all of my die cuts today, I did layer up additional die cuts for dimension, but you could totally skip that if you want to. And then a third card with that same design. This time I used pink, orange, and yellow paintbrushes, but the basic design is the same. These cards came together very quickly because we did all of that stamp layering and die cutting before, and so now we can just assemble a bunch of cards. All right, for my next card, I stamped the sentiment right in the center of the card and put 3 die cuts above it and 3 below it. This works great with a lot of stamped die cuts and is a basic design. Okay, for this I'm using the Blot Shop Solid Saying stamp set. I use this quite a bit in this video, and I've used it in previous videos too. I have a white note card that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches in the corner of my MISTI stamping tool. And on top of that, I have a Simon Says Stamp transparency grid. That is very helpful in getting your sentiment right at the center of the note card. Highly recommend that tool. I can then remove the transparency and stamp my sentiment, and I can be sure it's right in the center. I stamped it with Obsidian black pigment ink from Altenew, added clear embossing powder, and then heat set it. It gives it a nice shine. I then added 3 die cuts below and above the sentiment, and I'm putting glossy accents on parts of our stamped images just to make it pop a bit more. I find that adding the glossy accents and also heat embossing the sentiment really makes this simple card design stand out. I did a rainbow order here, but you could definitely use whatever leftover images you have for this card design. And you can even leave this center sentiment blank and add whatever you want to later when you have a particular occasion in mind. Let's do another example of how you can use your sticky mat to get placement on your card. Here I've put the card behind my sticky mat, and I'm placing some pencils starting at the top and working my way to the bottom, and also leaving a spot for that stamp. I just have the stamp laying on top of the sticky mat as a placeholder. Once I'm sure it'll all fit on my card just right, I can take my tape once again and pick up all of those crayons together. You can reuse these tape pieces a few times if you want to. Okay, after I've peeled this off, I can put adhesive on the back of all of those crayons. Then I can easily pick this up in one piece and make sure it's centered on my card. This is a huge time saver over trying to put down each of those individually and making sure they're centered. I then added the sentiment into that little gap that we created. This is a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch top folding white note card, and I did add glossy accents to the tips of the crayons just to make them stand out a bit more. It's a very simple card design, and once you have your stamping and die cutting done, it's quick to pull together. Here's another card that I did in the same way, where I laid all of my die cuts onto the sticky mat with the white note card behind it as a guide. And then I picked them all up together with the tape, glued them onto the note card, and added the sentiment in the gap. This time I used the paintbrushes and again put glossy accents on the tip of the paintbrushes so they'd stand out even more. I used the same sticky mat technique on my next card, and I used the Sunny Studio Teacher Appreciation stamp sets. I love making teacher cards, and this is a fantastic set with many different greetings. So this time I did 2 strips of pencils and paintbrushes, one towards the top and one towards the bottom, and I left a gap in between. In that gap, I stamped the sentiment from that Teacher Appreciation stamp set. So this uses more of those paintbrushes and pencils. However, I made a bunch earlier, so I'm able to do that. Now notice I did stamp on my matching envelope. Now throughout this video you'll see I did stamp on matching envelopes, and I used 2 different stamp sets for that. They're both from the Blot Shop. The one on the left is Made for You, and the one on the right is Happy Mail Art stamp sets. I love these. I love the messages in that you can stamp them on your envelope or the back of cards. So you'll be seeing me use those more. Now on this one, you can see I stamped on my matching envelope. But I use the same technique of lining up my pencils, crayons, and paintbrushes and then picking them all up at once. This time I put a sentiment right across the center. All right, my next example also uses the sticky mat, but I have a little bit of a change in the technique that I do. So I have my white note card behind my sticky mat, and now I am placing on the sticky mat a bunch of pencils and crayons and paintbrushes, leaving a gap there towards the top center for a sentiment I'll add later. You can see that I'll cut some of those pieces in half so I can put half of the pencil towards one edge and the other half towards another edge. Once I have them all in place, this time I'm taking a piece of press and seal. I would have had to use too many pieces of tape to pick up all these pieces, so press and seal is the best answer. So I just tear off a piece, and then I press this right onto all of my die cuts. Once I have it pressed in place, I can pick up all the die cuts together, put glue on the back of them, and then add it to the card. Press and seal is a product available in grocery stores, but I'll also link to it below. It's funny because at this point here is when my doorbell rang, and it was Christina Werner who came to surprise me for the weekend all the way from Utah. So I actually let this film, and it was filming for like hours. So I had to edit all that out. But I just thought it was funny that at this point is where she showed up. Okay, so now I picked all those die cuts up together. Now I can put glue on the back of them. Then I can pick up the whole piece and get it centered right on top of my note card just where I want it, and then press it down and leave it there while it dries. Once it is dry, I can peel off the press and seal, which you can reuse many times, and then you can cut off all the extra pieces that are hanging off. I will keep all of those extra pieces and show you a card I make with them later in this video. All right, here is the completed card. I stamped just a note from the Ink Blot Shop Solid Saying stamp set in that little gap there towards the top. I really find that Solid Saying stamp set to be a good one because the sentiments are bold and the height of them is even across, so it fits into areas like this nicely. I did add glossy accents to some of my stamping to make it stand out a bit more. Here's another where I covered the entire background with our stamped die cuts, but this time I glued them on at an angle. Then on top of that, I added the Avery Elle Loads of Thanks die cut, with the top die cut being Erin Lee Creative black glossy cardstock. All right, let's do another card example, this time with pencils, and I decided to stamp a greeting on the side of the pencils and make my pencils hang off the edge of the card. For the sentiments on this one, I used the Simon Says Stamp Tiny Word stamp set. I use this one a lot, and it's a nice mix of sentiments. I taped each of my little pencils down into my MISTI stamping tool. You could have used a sticky mat, but I didn't think of it at the time, so I used reused pieces of tape to hold it in place. I then lined up a bunch of sentiments, stamped them all with black ink all at once, and now we have pencils with sentiments on the side. Now I wanted to do something special with this card, so I'm gluing all of my pencils so they hang off the edge. I do have 2 additional white die cuts behind each of these pencils so that they're strong because it'll be hanging off the edge, and I don't want that die cut to be flimsy. After I've glued all those down, I'll use my trimmer to cut some off the other side. I want to make sure that the overall width of this card, including what sticks off, is 4 1/4 so that it still fits in my envelope. So the note card here itself is 3 1/2 by 5 1/2, but the pencils hang off, making it 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I use my Stardust glitter pen to add a little bit of glitter to the metal on the pencils, just so it stand out a bit. But I thought this was fun to use those small sentiments on the side of the pencils. It reminds me of the pencils that we used to have with our names engraved on the side. Okay, my next 2 cards feature pencils and crayons coming out from the center point of a sentiment. Now for this, there are many ways you could do it. You could draw pencil lines to get them lined up just right, but I use the Altenew Mandala Maker stamp set. This stamp set has these circles that create dots on your card. You then use those dots to stamp little hearts or circles or stars, or add die cuts. I'm going to add die cuts following the pattern of these dots. So I have one of those circle dots that I am putting at the top center of my note card using my Simon Says Stamp Grid Transparency to help make sure it's centered. I then stamp that with black ink, but you could use a lighter ink. I just wanted you to be able to see it in the video. Now I'm gluing some crayons down so the tip of the pencil is on one of those dots. I then can use my T-ruler to make sure the pencil's straight. So I just line up the center of the crayon with the T-ruler and make sure it goes through the two dots that are opposite of it, the one in the center and then on the other side of the circle. You really don't need to use the T-ruler. You can just follow the dots on the circle, but this way it's really make sure that you have a nice result. So there you can see I'm using the T-ruler to make sure that my crayon points straight through the center of the circle. Now I actually started a video on the many ways you can use this stamp set and the dies that you can get to go with it, but I haven't finished up that video, but I wanted to show how you can use it with other die cuts. Really works well with this. So I continued all the way around the circle, and then it's time to add a sentiment to the middle. Now you could stamp a sentiment on a circle die cut, but I thought I would use the Simon Says stamp just because Word Mix 2 stamp set. So this has two large stamps that are clusters of sentiments. Then there's a coordinating die that quickly cuts them all out, so you have a lot of sentiments made at once. So I picked one of those and I'm stamping it onto white cardstock with black pigment ink, and then I will clear heat emboss it. Once I'm done, I can use the coordinating die to cut them all out, and I end up with multiple sentiments. I'll use one on this one and one on the next card. I really like this stamp set and coordinating die set. I've used it before, and I think there are other stamp sets that line up with the same die. So now I can glue that right into the center. So here is the completed card. I did stamp an ink blot shop image on my matching envelope. I did heat emboss that sentiment in the center so it has shine, and I put glossy accents on the tip of my crayons. So that shine really adds some interest to the card. So again, this was one that came together very quickly, and using that Altenew stamp set was really a tool to make it easier to create this fun focal point on the card. And by the way, I forgot to mention that on the back of these cards, I am stamping my Made By stamp from the Ink Blot Shop stamp set, and all I have to do is sign my name underneath it. I like how it all ties together nicely. Here's a similar example, but this time I made the focal point on the bottom right of the card and added even more images. I again used the Altenew Mandala Maker stamp set to stamp the circle of dots, but this time on the bottom right. I put the tip of all of those pencils on the dots and glued them in place. And now in between the pencils, I'm gluing some crayons so I could fill more of the card. There are many ways you can use that Mandala Maker stamp set, but it is really helpful in lining up die cuts in a circle like this. So after I have all my pencils and crayons glued in place, I can let it dry and then trim off the excess, and I keep all of the pieces that I cut off. Again, I'll show you what to do with those later. In the center, I added a circle high die cut that is also from that Simon Says stamp Word Mix stamp set and coordinating die that I used on my last card. So this one again didn't take very long because all of my stamping was already done. Okay, I have two more using these images before we move on to the flowers. This is the one where I used all my leftover pieces. So I have a mini slimline card that is 6 1/4 by 3.5 inches. And along the bottom, I'm putting my die cuts. And I'm just kind of lining them up in different ways, just random. Notice some of them are full die cuts and some are like half of a crayon or maybe a pencil where the tip was cut off earlier. That's okay. I'm going to put a sentiment along the bottom and no one will ever see they're cut off. So you can save all of those little bits and pieces and create a border card like this one. To cover the bottom of the border, I just added a white cardstock strip where I stamped just a note and also a little bit of black glossy paper behind that. So you can see how there's a bit of shine with the glossy paper and the glossy accents that I put on some of our stamped images. Very simple card design, and it just uses up our little extras that we had cut off. And last but not least, we have a simple thanks card. This again uses the Sunny Studio dot embossing folder on a white note card that is 4 1/4 by 5.5. I used the Avery Elle thanks die cut, but this time I used an additional image of the paint palette from the Sunny Studio's Color My Life stamp set. So I just kept it very simple, added a few pearls and some glossy accents. All right, now let's move on to the flowers that we created at the beginning of this video. I have a few different tips for you on this, but again, I really wanted the color to stand out. So the rest of the card is in soft colors and a basic design. Now for some of my cards, I use the Sunny Studio Frilly Frames Eyelet Lace die set. Love this one because you have the scallop frame with lots of details on the edge, and you have the eyelet pattern that you can use with or without it. I use them together. Another older Sunny Studio product that I'm using on a couple of my cards is the Sunny Studio Botanical Backdrop die. It creates a leaf frame, but also cuts a bunch of flowers. So you can use the flowers to build up a floral scene. I'm only using the leaf frame today. Okay, once again, I'm using my sticky mat to help arrange my flowers before I add them to my card. So I have the stems and I have some flowers and leaves here. And once I'm happy with the arrangement, I can use a piece of press and seal, the same one I used earlier, and pick them all up together. Another advantage of doing this is that you can pick up this whole piece and put it on different backgrounds and decide which one you like best. I have this frilly frame die cut where I added some gold stitching. I tried it on that and I thought, well, let's try the botanical frame and see what it looks like on that. So you can just pick up all the pieces together, you can see through the press and seal, and decide which you like better. This time I decided to use the frame, so I'm putting glue on the back of it and adding it to a light gray note card where I use that dot embossing folder. This is Lawn Fawn Fog cardstock. Now I did do 3 layers thick of the frame, so there's some dimension to it and it allows it to stand out a bit more. All right, so now I can put glue on the back of the flowers, pick up the whole press and seal piece, press it down onto our card, and then leave it there to dry. Once it's dry, I can remove the press and seal and keep it for future use. For sentiment, I used the Sunny Studio gift card pocket die set. This has a little gift card pocket die that you see on the top center, but it also has the words for and you in cursive and the word for in small individual letters. I die cut them from black cardstock and added them to my card. I like how this could be a card for many different occasions. I also added some Trinity Stamps silver satin baubles. Those are the little pearls that you see on there. Instead of being shiny, they have a satin matte finish that I think is really beautiful. So this was a very simple card to pull together because we did all of our layered stamping and die cutting earlier. Here's a similar design using many of the same products. I used the botanical frame in white on a white note card this time. The Just a Note is from the Greetery Opposites Attract stamp set, which I've used many times in the past. Really like the style of it. And this time I used gold satin baubles. If you find a design you like, just make multiples of that, just changing up the colors and the sentiments. For this next one, I used the Sunny Studios Frilly Frames die set that I showed you earlier. I cut it from white cardstock and I used Altenew metallic thread to add some stitching to the eyelet pattern in the background. I just connected the little dots in the pattern to create a plaid look with the gold thread. Then added the flowers on top and a sentiment from the Honey Bee Pick Me Up stamp set. It says special delivery just for you, and I used a coordinating die to cut it out. I also added some Trinity Stamps gold satin baubles once again, and everything is on a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch white note card. Now for this next one, I used lots of the different poppies that I stamped earlier and added them to a white note card. I wanted the center of the flowers to have some shine, so I'm putting tiny little dots of glue. Then I'm adding Wow Earth Sparkles glitter. This is a biodegradable glitter, and I really like the color. So I'm putting that at the center of each of the flowers, and I can knock off the excess later on. I also white heat embossed So Grateful for You from the My Favorite Things stamp set I showed you earlier. That's on black cardstock, and then I put a thin strip of glitter cardstock underneath it, and that matches the glitter in the center of the flowers. That little touch of glitter allows this card to have a bit of shine. It has a lot of flowers on it, but the background is solid white, so the glitter helps it to stand out. I decided I wanted to make another thanks card using that Avery Elle die set, so this time I used it with the poppy stamps. On the background, I used the Dots embossing folder. It's a white note card that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I added the thanks die cut. You can see the black cardstock is glossy, and the shadow die I cut from white cardstock. I used the Trinity Stamps gold satin baubles again, and then a So Grateful for You message underneath it from a Simon Says Stamp sentiment strip set. This basic card design would work with any sentiment dies that you may have. And last but not least, I liked the mix of the different color flowers together. This time I did it on a white top folding 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch note card. And then I added a sentiment strip that said "You're amazing" from the Ink Blot Shop Solid Saying stamp set. I also added a few white pearls to the background for a bit of added interest. And there you have it, a load of cards all made using stamped and die cut images that we created using my stamp layering trick. If you are interested in any of these products, they are linked below. I would love to hear which of these you like the best, so please leave that in the comments below because I do want to go back and make more, and so I'd love to hear what you liked. If you want photos of all these cards, you can go to my blog, which will be linked here at the top right at the end or in the description below. In the middle, I have a couple other videos with stamp layering tricks. Everyone is different, and we have different ways we like to create, so you might want to check out those if you're looking for other ideas for stamp layering. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you again very soon.